In the 1970s, Demon Wilson was everywhere. His face appeared in millions of living rooms each week, his voice instantly recognizable, his presence woven into the rhythm of American television. As Lamont Sanford on Sanford and Son, Wilson became part of a cultural moment that felt alive, urgent, and deeply human. The show wasn't background noise, it was appointment viewing. Families gathered, laughed, and quoted lines together. At a time when television could turn actors into permanent fixtures of public life, Wilson stood at the center of it all. Fame arrived quickly and decisively, bringing admiration, financial security, and creative opportunity. By every external measure, he had made it. Yet beneath the surface of success, Wilson was beginning to sense something many performers discover too late. The spotlight can illuminate your life while quietly hollowing it out. What looked like the beginning of endless ascent was, in truth, the start of a difficult internal reckoning. Becoming Lamont Sanford Demon Wilson was just 26 years old when he stepped into the role that would define his public identity. Standing opposite Red Fox, a seasoned and commanding comedic force, was no small task. Yet Wilson brought balance, restraint, and emotional grounding to Lamont Sanford, making the character more than a punchline. Lamont was patient without being weak, frustrated without being cruel, and loving without being sentimental. That dynamic gave Sanford and Son its emotional weight. While Fred Sanford exploded across the screen with exaggeration, Lamont anchored the chaos in reality. Viewers mirrored your viewery as father and son because Wilson played Lamont with sincerity rather than showmanship. The chemistry wasn't accidental. It was built on listening, timing, and trust. As the show climbed the ratings, Wilson's performance became inseparable from its success. Lamont wasn't just reacting to Fred Sanford, he was the audience's emotional guide through the madness. Living inside a cultural phenomenon. At its peak, Sanford and Son was more than a hit sitcom. It was a shared national experience. Week after week, tens of millions tuned in, making it one of the most watched programs on television. For Wilson, this meant instant recognition wherever he went. Fame followed him into grocery stores, airports, and restaurants. The role opened doors professionally, but it also placed him inside a machine that never fully stopped moving. Interviews, press appearances, expectations, and constant public scrutiny became part of daily life. While audiences saw laughter and familiarity, Wilson felt the growing pressure of being permanently associated with a single identity. Success came fast, and with it came the unspoken demand to stay visible, stay relevant, and stay agreeable. Hollywood rewarded consistency, but rarely asked whether the person inside the role was still whole. For Wilson, the noise surrounding the show began to drown out his own inner voice. After the show ended. When Sanford and Son concluded in 1977, Wilson did what many successful actors do. He kept working. He moved into new television projects, including Baby, I'm Back, and later, The New Odd Couple, demonstrating range and adaptability. He took film roles, explored different formats, and proved he was more than a single character. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The momentum remained, but the fulfillment did not. Wilson began to question whether constant performance was the same as purpose. Hollywood offered opportunities, but they came with conditions that felt increasingly misaligned with his evolving values. While many peers doubled down, chasing longevity at any cost, Wilson slowed his pace. From the outside, it looked like a career cooling off. Internally, it was something else entirely. He was listening to doubt, to exhaustion, and to a growing sense that success without meaning was an unsustainable bargain. A spiritual turning point. Sometime after his peak fame, Demon Wilson experienced a profound spiritual awakening that reshaped his life. This wasn't a publicity move or a temporary phase. It was a fundamental shift in how he understood purpose, identity, and fulfillment. Wilson became deeply involved in faith, eventually becoming an ordained minister and devoting himself to spiritual study and service. He spoke openly about how fame had left him feeling disconnected rather than complete. Despite recognition and financial comfort, he described an inner emptiness that success could not fill. Faith gave him language for questions Hollywood never encouraged him to ask. It offered grounding instead of validation, direction instead of applause. Rather than attempting to balance two worlds, Wilson made a decisive choice. He stepped back from the industry to protect his spiritual growth, fully aware that doing so might cost him relevance, income, and public visibility. Choosing principle over spotlight. Walking away from Hollywood is easy to romanticize, but in reality it requires uncommon resolve. For Demon Wilson, the decision meant turning down opportunities many would consider irreplaceable. He took a long hiatus from acting, not out of a bitterness, but out of conviction. He wrote books, preached, traveled, and focused on spiritual leadership. In interviews, he described Hollywood as an environment that had challenged his moral clarity and personal peace. Unlike actors who disappear due to lack of opportunity, Wilson stepped away while still recognized. He did not chase reinvention or nostalgia. He embraced obscurity as a form of freedom. The industry moved on, as it always does. But Wilson did not seem troubled by that reality. He had already found something more sustaining than attention. His absence wasn't a failure of ambition. It was an assertion of autonomy in a system that really rewards it. A quiet return on his own terms. After decades away from the spotlight, Demon Wilson eventually returned to acting in a limited capacity. His later work was selective and personal rather than strategic. These roles were not about reclaiming fame, but about creative expression aligned with who he had become. There was no press tour framing his return as a comeback, no urgency to reclaim a place he had willingly left. Instead, his appearances felt reflective, measured, and intentional. Wilson no longer needed the industry to define him. Acting became one thread in a much larger life, not its center. This approach stood in contrast to a culture that often equates relevance with constant output. Wilson demonstrated that stepping back does not erase legacy. It reframes it. His return was not about proving anything, but about closing a circle with clarity rather than regret. Redefining what legacy means. For many, Demon Wilson's legacy begins and ends with Lamont Sanford, and that role will always matter. It shaped television history and continues to reach new generations through reruns. But his deeper legacy lies in the choices he made when the camera stopped rolling. Wilson showed that fame is not a lifelong obligation, that success does not have to come at the expense of values, that it is possible to leave, grow, and return without apology. In an industry defined by excess and ego, he chose humility and introspection. In a culture obsessed with being seen, he chose to be grounded. His life challenges the assumption that relevance is the highest form of achievement. Sometimes walking away is not an escape, but a correction. And sometimes the bravest performance is the one that happens off screen. Walking his own path. Demon Wilson's story resonates because it mirrors a question many people face, whether famous or not. What do you do when the life you built no longer feels like the life you want? His answer was neither dramatic nor destructive. It was thoughtful, disciplined, and deeply personal. He didn't reject his past or disown his success. He simply refused to let it define his future. Wilson lived as an actor, a minister, an author, and a father, moving between those roles with intention rather than conflict. His journey reminds us that fulfillment is not found by staying in the spotlight forever, but by knowing when to step out of it. In the end, Demon Wilson didn't abandon his path. He expanded it. And that may be the most enduring lesson his life has to offer.